Government budgets are under pressure like never before, thanks to the enormous cost of the COVID pandemic. So some eyebrows may have been raised this morning when it was announced that defence spending is to receive a boost. The Chancellor is expected to announce his spending review next week, with reports that foreign aid could be one of the areas to lose out. This morning, however, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown joined another former Prime Minister, David Cameron, in opposing vehemently any cuts, however temporary, in foreign aid. But are they necessary, really, to prepare the nation's finances? Joining me now to discuss this are the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, Bob Seely, and the former International Development Secretary, Conservative International Development Secretary, Justine Greening. Thank you both very much indeed for being with us. Bob Seely, in the circumstances, do you think it is right now to reduce the overseas development budget?
I think it's a conversation worth having because we are in a very unique set of circumstances, and it's really important that we take people with us when it comes to foreign aid. I think the 0.7 is fair enough. I do think now is a time to have a conversation about the scope of it. And I know Justine did great work when she was Secretary of State, making sure that money was well spent. But there's a strategic question about whether you spend the entire 0.7 on what is quite a narrow definition of aid still, or whether you seek to do good with it in other ways. Maybe two very quick examples. Firstly, that the aid budget should fund UK peacekeeping, which is an absolute moral good. And secondly, that the UK aid budget should pay for and fund all of the BBC World Service, which again is an absolute moral good. And it sees development in peacekeeping, but also in freedom of thought and freedom of thinking as well. And you expand that definition a bit. And I think if we did that, we'd get more people on side with this.
This, of course, Justine Greening, coincides with the merging of the International Development Department with the Foreign Office. What do you think of those ideas of Bob Seely, of just looking a bit more broadly as to what foreign aid is, which, of course, would take the pressure off other areas?
I think what's important is there's an overall strategy on our foreign policy. I sat on the National Security Council for nearly 4 years, and one of the key issues we were always conscious of was the need for our defence policy to sit alongside aid and development and also diplomacy. I think this isn't a question of either or. I think Bob is right to flag up that these defence actions and wider actions and DFID go hand in hand. Obviously, the MOD was crucial in helping us tackle Ebola, also stepped up to the plate when we were responding to Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. But from my perspective, the 0.7% commitment is important. It's not just the right thing to do and part of Britain being a global leader. It's also the smart thing to do. Stopping countries from slipping backwards is how we avoid costly wars. It's how we avoid unnecessary migration. Helping them move forward is also how we can develop the trade markets of the future. And I think we all have to recognise that net zero and levelling up are both global challenges. Talent is spread evenly, opportunity is not. That's why we have so much migration. So aid and development matters. I think it's time, though, to look in the round about absolutely how we can make sure it works effectively alongside defence and alongside our diplomacy.
Bob Seely, one element of this is Britain's commitment, re-emphasised in the latest Conservative election manifesto, of that 0.7% of GDP being spent on foreign aid. That is a commitment made publicly to the UN. Not many other countries, frankly, follow it, including the United States and most European countries. Do you think it is important for the UK's status, if you like, after Brexit, as global Britain, that we should live up to and honour that commitment? Or does COVID mean that, maybe we should think again?
We did make that commitment, and it is an important one, and we do need to be a global leader in this field as well as others. But there are two sort of repeated issues that keep coming up with aid that Justine made the point on. Firstly, you have the problem of integration of overseas. You have the problem of integration. So you've got defence, but you've got the Home Office as well spending money on overseas aid. You've got other departments that don't spend as well as DFID, and it's about working to cohere these into some kind of coherent policy, and that's where I hope the integrated review will come in. But there's more that needs to be done on that. A way we can help on that is to have a national strategy council that looks 5-10 years into the future. The second problem, we keep coming back to aid because we do spend an awful lot more compared to other countries. And there are constant questions about getting value for money and whether that is right, because we make no other funding requirement for other government departments. And I think the way that we solve that other problem, that last problem, is that if we make sure that we can take everyone in this country with us, including some people are sceptical, I think that it means we put the argument over the worth of foreign aid to bed. And the way you do that is to expand the definition, at least for some elements of your aid, so you're bringing in things that people recognise as being good for the world. BBC World Service, British peacekeeping operations, maybe contributions to the UN, to the World Health Organization to be covered from the aid budget. And in that way, I think you strengthen the credibility of long-term aid, and people can see that it really is in Britain's benefit, because we're not just spending money according to other people's definition of aid, but we're combining it with a justified and self-interested idea of what's in the globe's interest and what's in Britain's interest as well.
Justine Green, do you think there is a problem with what is defined as aid by the United Nations, and that perhaps that's an area we should look for more flexibility?
I think there's always going to be a necessary debate on how we define aid. I think it does need to keep up to date with a changing world, and the fact that actually how we respond in humanitarian crises and do development is changing. But I think behind that, it is important that when it comes to defence, we also make sure that our NATO allies step up, as we have done, and meet this 2% of GNI commitment that Britain has been prepared to do. We now spend 2.85% of our gross national income on defence, but actually we're still yet to see NATO countries do that. They have to pay their fair share. I think we're a much better place to get them to do that when we are meeting our own international commitments that we've made on defence, but also DFID and aid. The key from my perspective is, of course, making sure that aid is well spent. As Bob says, I put a lot of time and effort into making sure that happened whilst I was at DFID. The challenge now, I think, is to make sure that as we leave the European Union and have a post-Brexit Britain, that we really have a strong global Britain policy and that we really put aid at the heart of that. But yes, it's absolutely also about building those trade markets of the future. I think one thing that does often frustrate people is when they see aid going to richer countries, for example, like China. I think those are areas that we do need to be very careful of, that it doesn't look like we're giving aid to those sorts of countries that don't really need it.
I think it's also, if I could just...
Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Important to say we haven't yet had a government announcement. We don't know what the plans for aid spending going forward are going to be, although they should be announced next week.